poner sanciones. Tenemos finalmente a Marina Zucker, investigadora del Global Policy Center de la Universidad de Boston, quien analizará el papel del sistema de pagos transfronterizos SIPS en yuanes. Este es uno de los más avanzados que están fuera del dólar. Ella nos va a explicar un poco de la experiencia china, la implicación internacional del renminbi, cómo se está insertando como moneda internacional. Y bueno, este es uno de los casos más avanzados de alternativas al dólar. Finalmente, tenemos los valiosos comentarios de Ana García de la Universidad Federal Rural de Río de Janeiro y miembro de BRICS Policy Center. Este espacio como tal, pues estamos buscando generar un diálogo abierto, entonces siéntanse libres de ir mandando sus preguntas por el chat, yo las voy recopilando. Al final tenemos una sesión breve de preguntas y respuestas y entonces pasamos con nuestro primer panelista que sería Marcelo. Marcelo, muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Jorge, por la presentación. Para mí es un lujo estar acá con tan grandes expositores y tratando este tema que me interesa tanto y con la reciente publicación del paper. Voy a compartirles un PowerPoint con algunas ideas en base a este paper. Eh, Creo que ahí se está viendo bien. Eh, el, el PowerPoint es sobre la presentación mía sobre los acuerdos regionales de pago, que es lo que presenté recientemente, principalmente en América Latina. Y primeramente lo que analizo en el artículo que van a tener ustedes para leer, y que, como comentó Jorge, ya está disponible en la página de Latindadd, a quien agradezco muchísimo la publicación, es discutir ¿qué significa cooperación monetaria financiera regional? ¿Y por qué discutir esto? Porque justamente durante toda la primera parte del siglo XXI, desde el 2000 hasta el 2010 aproximadamente, hubo mucha literatura. Primero hubo mucha literatura pensando que América Latina podía imitar a lo que es la eurozona. Cuando la eurozona se pensaba como una experiencia sumamente exitosa en América Latina, en Argentina, y en el Mercosur y en otras partes de la región, se pensó que se podía imitar esto y que podíamos tener una moneda común. En otro momento, desde una perspectiva más heterodoxa, se pensó que podría crearse una arquitectura financiera regional que reemplace o complemente a una arquitectura financiera internacional. Y también hubo mucha literatura sobre este tema, mucho incluso desde la CEPAL, desde una perspectiva un poco más heterodoxa, porque entendía que la arquitectura financiera internacional era problemática para los países de América Latina y que la arquitectura financiera regional de alguna forma podía ser como una defensa para eso. Y también hubo una propuesta de crear el Banco del Sur, que fue una propuesta política concreta, que tuvo un devenir eh, complicado, porque se creó con un objetivo primero, pero después terminó siendo otra cosa. Y todas esas cuestiones que fueron pasando, hubo distintas discusiones sobre la arquitectura financiera regional. Y hubo distinta literatura, y hubo literatura con una ideología más ortodoxa, con teorías más ortodoxas o con teorías más heterodoxas, y dentro de las teorías heterodoxas creo que también hubo algunas más neo-keynesianas, post-keynesianas de distinto tipo. Eh, y en ese lío, en ese, en ese, en esa heterogeneidad de acuerdos de qué es la cooperación financiera regional, un poco nos perdimos, porque se hablaba de cooperación monetaria y financiera regional, y se mencionaba un montón de cosas muy distintas. Y por eso me parecía que en este artículo era importante recuperar a una de esas cosas que me parece que es especialmente importante en este contexto, que son los acuerdos regionales de pago, los acuerdos de pago, y separar, que no es lo mismo la cooperación financiera monetaria como un todo, como una cosa heterogénea que tratamos de categorizar, y acá estamos hablando de algo puntual, y me parecía importante hacer esa salvedad, ese punto, después de toda la literatura que tuvimos hace 10 años, hace 20 años, y que hoy volvemos a tener que leer. ¿Qué son los acuerdos de pagos regionales? Acá lo podemos ver en un esquema muy simple que de hecho lo saco de un informe que hizo la Liga de la Sociedad de las Naciones en 1935, cuando estudió este tema y lo estudió para los acuerdos bilaterales de clearing que se estaban dando en la década del 30. Y en este esquema se ve muy simplemente de que puede haber una transferencia de bienes, exportación de bienes desde un país A un país B, y viceversa, desde el país B hacia el país A, y que no hay pagos entre países, que hay un banco central en el país A que funciona como clearing office, y hay un banco central en el país B que funciona como clearing office, y simplemente los importadores pagan en moneda local a la clearing office, y la clearing office le va a pagar a los exportadores en moneda local de su país. La dificultad justamente de esto es que entre los dos países, entre exportaciones e importaciones, tienen que estar balanceados. Y esa es justamente la mayor dificultad que hubo en la década del 30, cuando estos acuerdos eran bilaterales, y se trató de subsanar a partir de lo que fue el Plan Keynes y a partir de lo que fue la Unión Europea de Pagos después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, con la multilateralización. La multilateralización ayudaría a que no existiera este problema de que los balances sí o sí tuvieran que estar balanceados. Pero la idea creo que está muy clara en este pequeño esquema que armó la Sociedad de las Naciones, y me llama la atención la claridad en un texto de hace 90 años. ¿Cuáles son las ventajas? ¿Para qué nos sirven los acuerdos de pago? Principalmente para dos cosas. Una es para promover el comercio regional, y la segunda cuestión es ahorrar divisas, ahorrar reservas, ahorrar moneda dura. Para la primera cuestión, principalmente lo que hacen los acuerdos de pago regionales es reducir los costos de transacción, porque para cualquier importador es mucho más sencillo pagar en moneda doméstica, eh, que tener que recurrir a un mercado cambiario, tener que hacer una operación internacional que es mucho más costoso. Eh, Simplemente es una transacción doméstica como si fuera pagar una empresa local. Por otro lado, hay una facilidad para comprar bienes de quien nos compra, porque si yo ya tengo un balance acreedor con un país vecino, entonces voy a tener que importar de ese país porque no voy a necesitar divisas para importar de ese país, con lo cual va a haber un sesgo discriminatorio hacia el resto del mundo de querer comprarle al país en el cual ya tengo un crédito. Y esto, el privilege, a ver, privilege es alguien que insiste mucho con esto, es que facilita la reciprocidad. Porque en cualquier acuerdo de comercio, acuerdo regional de comercio, en general lo que pasa es que, por un lado, los países tratan de comerciar entre sí, y eso significa que puede que haya algunos países con un saldo superavitario y otros países con un saldo deficitario. Bueno, un acuerdo de pago facilita, obliga a la reciprocidad, que el país que tiene un saldo acreedor se ve obligado a comprarle más al país que tiene un saldo deudor para equilibrar las cuentas en el comercio regional. Y por otro lado, en relación al ahorro de divisas, obviamente, en la medida que no es necesario pagar las importaciones en moneda dura, esto implica menor demanda de divisas, de liquidez, ya sea por motivos precautorios o por motivos transaccionales en el caso de los bancos centrales, porque simplemente hay que pagar los balances netos. No es necesario pagar cada importación, sino que se paga los balances netos cuando hay un saldo deficitario, y se lo hace recién después de al final de un periodo contable. No, no se lo hace todos los días, sino que si un periodo contable de 4 meses, 6 meses o de 3 meses, se paga después de 3 meses cuando se netean los balances de ambos países, del comercio de ambos países, con lo cual es mucho menor el requerimiento de divisas, y ese es el segundo motivo por el cual estos acuerdos regionales de pagos fueron muy demandados, muy requeridos en muchos momentos. Yendo a la historia de estos acuerdos de pagos regionales, hay tres etapas claramente definidas. La primera fue en el momento en el cual se expandieron muy fuertemente, que fue en la década del 30, en un contexto de controles de cambio, en un contexto de mucho proteccionismo comercial. Se expandieron muchísimo, en general entre países que tenían un saldo acreedor y un país que tenía un saldo deudor, y el país acreedor obligaba al país deudor a tratar de equilibrar esas cuentas mediante estos acuerdos de clearing. Eh, y posteriormente, Keynes y otros autores van a tomar esta experiencia de la década del 30 y Keynes en particular va a hacer la propuesta en Bretton Woods de un International Currency Union, la idea de una unión de clearing internacional, que no va a prosperar, como sabemos, que fueron las ideas de White en los acuerdos de Bretton Woods, pero sin embargo, a partir de la edad de oro, el capitalismo con la Segunda Guerra Mundial, sí surgieron otros acuerdos regionales de pago multilaterales. El principal fue la Unión Europea de Pagos, que surge en 1950 y va a durar hasta 1958, y como dice Putin, termina por su éxito y no por su fracaso. Y en particular en el caso de América Latina se va a crear el convenio de pagos y créditos recíprocos a partir de la experiencia de la ALAL, la Asociación Latinoamericana de Libre Comercio, en 1965, y va a haber también otros tipos de acuerdos multilaterales en Asia. Y estos acuerdos van a ser bastante exitosos en términos generales, como lo vamos a ver. Y finalmente tenemos otros acuerdos creados muy recientemente, que son el SUPRE y el Sistema de Pagos en Monedas Locales, que son más diversos, heterogéneos y menos claros. Entonces, me interesaba separar estas tres etapas. ¿Qué tenemos en América Latina? Como le mencioné, tenemos el Convenio de Pagos y Créditos Recíprocos, que primero funcionaba en el marco de la LAR y después en el marco de la LADI, que se crea en 1965 y está vigente. El sistema de pagos en monedas locales, creado en el marco del Mercosur, que es bilateral, es muy simple, lo cual es bueno, pero al mismo tiempo es muy limitado, creado en el 2008, y también el SUPRE, que ahí tengo mal anotado, creado en el 2009, y que contenía distintos países como Ecuador y Venezuela. Cuando vemos la suerte un poco de estos acuerdos, lo que fue pasando en los últimos años es que prácticamente su uso es muy limitado. En el caso del convenio de pagos y créditos recíprocos, como vemos, fue muy exitoso en sus comienzos, en la década del 60, 70, 80, sobre todo en el marco de la crisis de la deuda, pero más recientemente su uso prácticamente es nulo. eh, Sobre todo en la década del 90 se empezó a utilizar a partir de las ideas del Consenso de Washington que prosperaron. Cuando vemos el sistema de pagos en monedas locales, y podemos decir lo mismo para el Sucre, lo que sucedió es que hubo una simetría muy fuerte. En el caso del sistema de pagos en monedas locales, son el bilateral entre Argentina y Brasil, son todas exportaciones brasileñas a Argentina, y prácticamente no hay exportaciones argentinas a Brasil que se canalicen a través del sistema. Y lo mismo pasaba en el Sucre, eran en su momento todas exportaciones de Ecuador hacia Venezuela, mientras que no había exportaciones de Venezuela a Ecuador. ¿Por qué este motivo? Por la simetría monetaria. Ecuador estaba dolarizado, con lo cual todos los exportadores ecuatorianos preferían cobrar en una moneda dura, y Brasil tiene una moneda más estable que la Argentina, por lo tanto los exportadores brasileños tienen mayor deseo de cobrar en su propia moneda, y en cambio los exportadores argentinos prefieren cobrar en dólares. Con lo cual, lo que tenemos en estos sistemas más recientes es una fuerte simetría, y por lo tanto en este pequeño ratito que tenemos para hablar, sería bueno también que puedan leer el artículo para llegar a mayores desarrollos y conclusiones, y poder seguir discutiendo estos temas, es que principalmente los acuerdos regionales de pago no son un instrumento, no son una herramienta, sino que deben ser una política complementaria a otras políticas, como de desarrollo económico, y a otras políticas en las cuales sea necesario administrar la restricción externa, y otras políticas que promuevan el comercio regional. Eso me parece muy interesante, porque muchas veces se piensa como un simple instrumento, y no es un instrumento, es una política en el marco de otras políticas que piensan en el desarrollo económico. No se puede pensar en los acuerdos regionales de pago en un marco de apertura comercial y apertura financiera, porque los acuerdos regionales de pago tienen otros. Como marcó Previs, y tomando también ideas de Keynes, los acuerdos regionales de pago deberían promover nuevos flujos de comercio, y no necesariamente discriminar, cambiar comercio de una forma o con un país a otro país, en el mismo sentido de que el dinero es creación endógena, tiene una creación endógena, y eh, promueve la producción de los países. Bueno, también podemos pensar que los acuerdos regionales de pago son creación endógena de dinero, y que debería servir para la producción de los países que los utilizan. Y por último, en este contexto de disputa tan fuerte que hay a nivel global en términos monetarios y financieros, me parece que como mecanismo de defensa para los países de América Latina es muy importante que puedan resguardar su comercio, defender su comercio, y uno de los mecanismos clave para defender ese comercio regional es utilizando estos acuerdos de pago que son complementarios a los acuerdos comerciales. Muchísimas gracias por por el tiempo. Para mí es un placer estar acá. Todos los expositores en general los leo a menudo y los admiro mucho. Así que agradezco muchísimo la oportunidad. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Marcelo, muy interesante. Igual les recuerdo si tienen alguna pregunta la pueden ir poniendo en la caja del chat y también recordarles que contamos con la interpretación en inglés y en portugués. Entonces, ahora cedo la palabra a Esteban Pérez de CEPAL para que nos profundice en estos temas. Él tiene una amplia trayectoria. Igual, muchos documentos pueden encontrarlos en línea y es un colaborador nuestro este que, la verdad, de lujo. Entonces, te cedo la palabra, Esteban. Muchas gracias.
Sí, muchas gracias y muchas gracias a Latindadd por esta invitación. Es un placer compartir este panel con investigadores tan destacados. Voy a dar entonces, voy a eh, compartir la presentación. Bien, ¿la ven?
Sí, Esteban, perfecto.
Okay. La voy a dar en inglés si no hay problema. My presentation is going to be about de-dollarization in Latin America, and I'm going to make 3 points about de-dollarization. The first, that it's a long-standing tradition that goes back perhaps to the 19th century. Second, that we have some experiences whereby we can draw some lessons. And third, that the dollarization as a concept has changed over time. And we have moved to a new concept of dollarization, and dollarization has different dimensions. Dollarization is not the same thing as it used to be as just having deposit in foreign currency. Today, they're tied to the productive structure, and they tied also to a property of money that I think has risen in terms of importance, which is the unit of account, which is the invoicing currency, and which is a leverage currency. If we look at the history of Latin America, there have been attempts at monetary union that have not been successful. The Central American, first of all, Union, then the Central American Monetary Union in the 1960s. In the 2000s, the Caribbean single market and economy, which never passed really and perhaps never achieved even a customs unions. Then we have the regional payment systems that Marcelo mentioned. We have the lending in local currency today, which is lending by multilateral, global, and sub-regional development banks. And we have the development of bond markets in sovereign debt. That has been something that has been pushed to avoid the original sin. The dollar, this is a figure that complements the figures that Marcelo showed for Aladi and for the agreement in local currency between Brazil and Argentina. These are trade operations channeled through the Sucre, which basically declined over time, were never very important, and they were based basically on Venezuela, which took about 76% of the transactions. What are the lessons that we have learned if we looked at these attempts at de-dollarization in Latin America? There are several, and I'm going to mention just a few. First, there's the issue of large country dependence, and that happened in the Sucre. That happened also at the time when ECLA was pushing for Central American integration and centering periphery among Latin American countries who simply reproduce for Central America. And it also happened in the common single market and economy regarding the role of Trinidad and Tobago. And it happened also when ECLA pushed for expansion of the FLAR, and Brazil did not want to join this initiative. There's no really a specification of how the use of domestic currency and intra-regional trade currency will push and expand intra-regional trade and financial integration. Another issue that we've learned is that the guides or the proposals for regional integration fail in general to adapt the use of local currency to the local conditions and their levels of development. And I think that's clear of the Sucre, which was based on Keynes' clearing union, but failed really to show, for example, how Sucre holdings could translate in greater investment. It was never made clear, but it was part of the agreement. The incentives for increasing participation of private sector in terms of risk coverage and in terms also of credit insurance and guarantees is very important, and it's not really made explicit who in the end will take the risk, who or what will act as a collateral during these agreements. And that's a thing that really does not is not part generally neither or the normative nor or the laws establishing these agreements or the proposals. And another issue that's important is the issue of productive diversification. If these agreements or regional payments agreements or other instances of greater de-dollarization do not have some kind of productive diversification attached to them, it's going to be very difficult for increasing reciprocal trade, increasing intra-regional trade, or deepening financial integration. And I would like to just finish talking about the currency of repatriation of profits, which is a recent issue that has come up with the local bond market. We've learned that having bond markets in local currency is really irrelevant in the end. That what's relevant is who owns the bonds in local currency, because if they're foreign investor and they repatriate and the currency of the repatriation is the dollar, then we're exactly the same situation as before. Finally, I'd like to just make some comments on what do we mean by dollarization. Dollarization is a term that evolved over time, and we need to take this into consideration if we're going to have de-dollarization proposals. Initially, it was currency substitution. As a substitution in Latin America, not only is it tied to currency substitution as a substitution, it's very much tied to productive structure. And more recently, it is tied to the type of market, international capital markets, the bond market, that has become a major source of funding, always for the government, but also for the non-financial corporate sector. Here's deposit dollarization in countries of Latin America and the Caribbean between 2000 and 2020, the minimum, the maximum, and you will see that dollarization is prevalent in this sense in several countries of the region. This is a graph highlighting the issue of productive structure. This shows the rate of growth of GDP and the rate of growth of gross national real disposable income for Latin American countries and the Dominican Republic. The difference is that GDP does not take into account terms of trade, does not take into account remittances, whereas the real gross national income does. And you'll see the difference that I highlighted in the case of Honduras, for example, where the rate of contraction during COVID was about 9%. But if you take the real gross national income, which takes into account remittances, it was about half. And remittances play a tremendous role in these economies. Generally, we say, well, they foster unproductive consumption, but that's a real part. But they play a very important part in terms of cushioning the business cycle, and they played a very important part in terms of finance. They are a major source of finance for commercial banking, are a major source of reserves, and allow the central bank to maintain the nominal exchange rate at a certain level. So these are benefits. And if we want to talk about de-dollarization, what are we offering instead of benefits such as remittances, which actually reflects a productive structure of some countries exporting labor instead of commodities. And finally, I'd like to talk about the unit of account property. Debt has become debt in the capital markets has become has become generalized across different agents in the economy. If you look at the 1990s, it was basically the general government. If you start from 2009 after the financial crisis, all the different agents like the financial corporation, private banks, especially the non-financial corporations, have increased their holdings of dollars, have increased their debt in the international capital markets, and actually non-financial corporations is the most dynamic holder of issuer of bonds in the international capital markets, and certainly that has implications for investment that I'm going to show you. The first implication that I see in the general government in terms of the unit of account is this. It's the correlation that you have between emerging market bond index and the rate of change on the nominal exchange rate for these are for the major Latin American countries: Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, Brazil, and Chile, and you will see below the simple correlation coefficients. They tend to increase after the global financial crisis, so that the unit of account property has a very much an impact on risk, on government risk, and the government risk has a causal impact on the non-financial corporate sector risk. The productive structure here and the unit of account is important when you look at the firms that issue bonds in the international capital market, and bonds basically that are denominated in US dollars. This shows from a survey about 300 companies of a paper that I've written with a colleague. If you look at the number of issuing firms in manufacturing, there are about 36. Non-issuing firms, 85. But if you look at the total assets, if you look at the share of long-term debt, if you look at the share of investment in property, plant, and equipment, they basically have the bulk of all these financial variables. So that the unit of account matters, because the unit of account, and if it changes in any unit of account, changes in the nominal exchange rate, have a direct impact on the companies actually, and on the sectors that are leading sectors in Latin America. And finally, I would like to end showing this graph, which shows the profitability of firms that issue bonds in the capital markets in Latin America versus those that do not. The orange or red line is the bond issuing firms. The blue line is not the non-bond issuing firms. For agriculture, construction, information, manufacturing, mining, acquiring, wholesale trade, transportation, retail trade, and utility. And you will see that in six of the sectors, the bond issuing firms have higher profitability than non-bond issuing firms. The question is that the issue is that profitability does not translate into investment. It sometimes has to do with leverage, and sometimes has to do with financial investment. So if we look at dollarization in this way, and if we plan to include or to introduce measures of non-dollarization, what are we offering the productive sectors? What are we offering the countries that receive remittances, and that remittances become a source of cushioning of the business cycle, and that the international bond market denominated in dollars becomes an issue of profitability for the large companies that actually hold the majority of the economic activity in sectors and the investment. And those are key questions if we want to tackle and analyze this problem in a thorough way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Esteban, for your clear and highly available presentation. And now I'd like to give the floor to Artem Levenko, who will share with us the Eurasian experience and the mechanism that have been developed as alternative to the dollar. Please, Artem. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Let me share my screen, my presentation. Okay. Do you see the presentation? It's a
Not yet, but it's loading.
Okay. Now it's okay. Should I start?
Yes, is it starting now?
I see the presentation on my screen. Do you see on yours?
Not yet,
Not
but
yet.
it's loading.
It's loading. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Probably we can try once again.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I will try once again. Okay. Okay.
Otherwise, you can send me your presentation and we can.
Let's try one more time.
Yes.
Okay. Does it work?
No yet.
No, not
It's
yet.
still loading. So if you want,
So
it's better you.
I can send this presentation to you, Jorge, and you
Okay.
will share the screen. One sec, please. Yeah, I send it to you.
Okay. Give me a couple of minutes. Okay, I'm gonna share the screen now.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Okay, let's start with the first slide. The modern international financial architecture remains largely dollar-centric. According to the IMF estimates, the US dollar accounts for about 58% of global foreign exchange reserves and about 50% of international settlements and the vast majority of commodity trade. Also, I should mention that a lot of bilateral swap arrangements as a second GFSN layer are largely driven by Fed, and they are also denominated in US dollars. The next slide, please. The push for local currency financing by RFAs and IFIs is a strategic shift away from the traditional hard currencies like the US dollar, euro. This shift aims to mitigate foreign exchange risk for borrowing countries, deepen local capital markets, and enhance regional financial stability. While international financial institutions act as global and regional catalysts and facilitators, and IFIs, in many cases, especially multilateral development banks, are pioneers in enhancing local currency lending, especially in emerging markets. You can see these dynamics here on the slide. You see the main reasons for the push for local currencies. Actually, mitigating foreign exchange risks is a primary thing. Everyone knows that when countries borrow in foreign currency, and depreciation of their local currency can drastically increase the value of the debt and servicing costs, and the local borrowing eliminates this kind of risk. The second thing is that yeah, this slide, yes. Developing local capital markets, very important. By issuing local currency bonds and providing loans in local currencies, IFIs help to create a benchmark yield curve for the market to attract domestic and international investors and increase the overall depth and liquidity of such market. Enhancing macroeconomic stability is another reason. Reducing reliance on foreign currency debt makes the country financial system less vulnerable to external shocks and sudden stops in capital flows. The fourth thing is that alignment with long-term projects, infrastructure and social projects generate revenues in local currencies. That is why financing them in local currencies provides like so-called natural hedge for this and improves the project bankability. And the last one is the geopolitical and strategic diversification, also very important. Regions right now from the global south especially are seeking to reduce their dependency on the US dollar-based financial system to make their for their strategic autonomy. Please, the next slide. In this approach, I should highlight the BRICS efforts finding approaches for creating an alternative mechanism in the financial system is a strategic priority for the BRICS countries. And the goal of increasing the role of settlements in national countries for the BRICS was the priority for the BRICS leaders since 2009. And you may notice that in the BRICS economic partnership strategy until 2025, which was adopted in 5 years ago, a separate item is devoted to the issue of international financial architecture, including the role of national currency, cooperation on development of payment systems, deepening bond markets in national currencies, and other areas. Last years, from 2023 till now, the topic of de-dollarization of payments have become one of the priorities. And in 2024, there was a special report while Russian presidency in BRICS, a special reform on possible ways to reform international financial system. And this year, there was a technical report on BRICS cross-border payments, which contains the preferences of the group members regarding international settlements. Next slide, please. Also, I should highlight that in 2024, during Brazilian presidency G20, there were a lot of efforts, and me with my colleague, we established some kind of MDB roadmap for enhancing local currency lending. On this slide, you can see the main themes from this roadmap. MDBs should encourage their shareholders to set specific targets on a percentage of loans in local currencies. How to do it? It's the main question for MDBs and for other international financial institutions. The main thing is to change the business models, especially funding, risk management. High share of loans in local currencies, as I mentioned earlier, could deepen the liquidity of local capital markets and positively affect sovereign debt sustainability. Also, it's very important to know how to use all of these principles in practice. And we have a good example of, for instance, a new development bank, which has a specific objective in the strategy for this period of 2022-2026, a specific figure for local currency lending. I think it's very important to have these figures in strategies of other MDBs. Next slide, please. Despite all of these efforts to enhance local currency lending, we see a lot of challenges and limitations for this process. You can see them on the slide. In many developing countries, local capital markets are not so deep and liquid for this lending. High cost of hedging, institutional regulatory hurdles are also one of the reasons why it's so difficult to boost this lending in local currencies. And I'm a representative of the Eurasian Fund for Stabilization and Development, a regional financing arrangement. And in our institution, we try to enhance lending in local currencies. Please, next slide. Regional financial arrangements are the third layer of global financial safety net. Here on the slide, you see major RFIs. EFSD is working in Eurasian region. And I may say that from 2024, we have in our statutory documents, we have made some changes, and we now may provide financing in local currencies. It's very important for our member states. Our member states are countries from Central Asian Caucasus, as they have a lot of close ties with major economies like Kazakhstan and Russia. So these countries are very interested to receive financing from our institution, not only in US dollars, but also in tenge and in Russian rubles, etc. So the way for enhancing local currency lending is very important. Also, you may see that in CMIM in South Asia, also they do not have any active lending programs, but they are moving forward. They updated their operational guidelines, and they can use local currencies for their future arrangements. So it's very important. And this updated guidelines took effect in January 2022. So this is only the updates from the last years. Also, Arab Monetary Funds, it's using, of course, US dollars, but they have their Arab account in dinar. It's like something like SDR and IMF. Synthetic value, they have it. So they nominate their lending in this AAD. So it's another way to move from these dollar-centric international financial systems. But we have like BRICS CRA is FLAR, they are operating in US dollars. But regarding BRICS CRA, as far as I know, there are a lot of efforts nowadays to move away from this dollar-centric system and to make some right now negotiations between the countries to have a possibility in BRICS CRA to use not only US dollars. So the process is going on. Please, the next slide. And some figures in Eurasian region, we see the importance of financing in national currencies, both for non-sovereign and sovereign finances. You can see and retrieve more data from our project. You see the QR code on the slide. It's a special project of EFSD. We monitor IFI's financing in the region, and we see the trend of increasing financing in local currencies. You see the growth from 0.4 billion to 1.4 billion. And the major providers of local currency lending in the region for non-sovereign is Eurasian Development Bank, and for sovereign lending we see a lot of nowadays programs from the ADB and other RFIs. So we see from the figures that the process is going on. To be short, it's all about my presentations. Thank you for your attention. Happy to answer your question if you have so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Artem. Was an excellent presentation about the Russian experience and all this mechanism that we already have. Well, finally, I'm gonna give the floor to Marina Zucker. She's talk about the internationalization of renminbi and the cross-border international payment system. Is a Chinese experience. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, I was unmuted. So just checking.
Yeah,
can you see my screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, awesome. Primeiramente, muito obrigada, Latindadd e BRICS Center por convidar para participar dessa discussão. É uma discussão muito importante, especialmente agora. Eu vou falar em inglês. Eu fiz a pesquisa majoritariamente em inglês e em chinês, então eu vou mudar para inglês, que eu me sinto mais confortável. So thank you very much. So Latindadd and BRICS Center asked me to talk specifically about the CIPS, which is a payment system that the Chinese has developed in the last years. So this research that I'm doing today is mostly based on my PhD. So if you're interested in more aspects of the RMB internationalization, I'm very happy to share with you. We did some work on more political economy, on foreign exchange, RMB role in the foreign exchange markets. Today, I'm going to focus specifically on this article that is more on the payment infrastructure. So if we had 1 minute for me just, to wrap up what is the main argument of this paper. So basically, we know when we look to international currency status that is really highly path dependence. Why? Because that is economies of scale. So more you use, for instance, the dollar in the foreign exchange markets, smaller is what we call the bid-ask spreads. Smaller is the interest rate. So that is more incentives for you to continue to use the dollar. And also there is a lot of network externality. So it's like the English language. We learn English mostly because we know that most people speak English globally. So there is a lot of, given these characteristics, there is a lot of barriers for newcomers that want, to push the internationalization of your domestic currency. So the The argument of my paper is that for newcomers, we need to give us these market forces. The role of central banks play a key role in jumpstarting the currency internationalization process, specifically in reducing the barriers that we see in the market. And a key barrier that I highlight in this paper, it is the role of cross-border payment infrastructure, because they reduce what we call the payment friction. And this approach is quite different from what the currency literature tells, because we know the current mainstream literature tells that international currency use is mostly because of domestic, the size of the economy, which is true, institutions, interest rate, this is all true, but the literature doesn't give any agency for other countries trying to push currency internationalization. So when you look to the role of central banks, we can actually understand where an agency lies. So we are going, in this paper, I'm going to show a little bit of the evolution. Must say that this is not something that was a fast process, was a very slow evolving process. So this is what I aim to show you. So first question, is the Chinese unique? I think now in the fourth presentation of the day, we have clearly that is not. We have experiences in Eurasia, in Latin America that we talk a little bit. This is a table that is in a forthcoming paper that we're doing with colleagues in Free University of Berlin and in Leeds University. So basically, we try to map the payment, initiatives globally. We have many cases where the payment initiatives were like multi-currency or regional, local specifically for trade operations. Some of them were cross-border for tourists that are going, in regions. This is the case of the ASEAN Currency Initiative. In Africa, also it's a case of trade. We have also cases where they are incomplete, where there is no actually payment system, but is message systems where then banks can settle the funds bilaterally, but they can facilitate the message of the banking. The case of the RMB, I would say it's the most complete case in terms that it's a single currency one, so it's a unilateral approach, but it's the one that is more complete because not only there was a network of correspondent banking, but now actually a clearinghouse with international reach. So very quickly, where the internationalization of the RMB stands, we know that now there is a recent BIS triennial survey in the foreign exchange market, and we saw recently that the RMB has increased its share to 7 to 85%. It's now the fifth most currency used globally, and it's only the only currency from a developing country in the top 10. We know, this is from my PhD, we know that currency internationalization in the case of RMB is really focused in the role of this currency as a medium of exchange. So mostly for trade invoices, this is where RMB is mostly focused. And although when we look to a whole Chinese trade, it's around 30-35% of Chinese trade is actually now settled in RMB. You may say, oh, it's not 100, it's not significant. Actually, when compared to other developing countries, this is very significant because most developing countries, they rely, almost 100% in the dollar to make trade. It's important to understand that the Chinese case was a managed internationalization. They tried to pursue the internationalization of the RMB, trying to maintain, to some extent, capital account management, which is something unique. And then in terms of payment infrastructure, when we see the strategy from the central bank, we can see three main processes of increasing payment channels. The first one, especially at the start, is the increase of the correspondent banking accounts. So basically, commercial banks having accounts in RMB in other banks. And this network of correspondent banking allowed the RMB internationalization process, especially at the start. We also saw many Chinese financial institutions going abroad, trying to serve their clients investing abroad. And this is also a new channel for actually more use of the RMB in terms of payment. And finally, we saw the payment system creation by itself. So going a little bit on the evolving integration, we know that China is very, highly integrated in the dollar system. When we see, for instance, the American payment systems in dollar, which is it's the cross-border, the payment system with cross-border reach. In the case of dollar is the chips. And there are, 5 Chinese banks that are direct participants in CHIPS and many others that indirectly. So this enables China to be part of the dollar system. But the RMB system really started to take place during 2009 in a pilot program initiated by the PBOC and other regulators. And it was focused basically on 2 models at the beginning, which was correspondent banking, what I call the domestic agent model, and the clear bank model. So basically, the difference is which are the commercial, where the commercial bank accesses the Chinese clearing bank, which is the Synapse HVPS, which stands for the Chinese National Advanced Payment Systems, High Value Payment Systems, which is basically the central bank clearinghouse. So at the start, foreign banks could access the clearinghouse, the Chinese clearinghouse, one via a correspondent banking in mainland China, based for instance in Shanghai, in Beijing, or they also had the option to access through Hong Kong. And because of the role of Hong Kong as a very strong financial center in Asia, this really pick up, the second model really pick up. So a lot of payments went through Hong Kong. So about 70% at the time. And it's also important to understand that there was initial restriction of the use of RMB accounts. At the beginning, when the pilot scheme started, it was only 360 companies that were approved to do it. There was, over time, there was geographical expansion. At the beginning, only 20 provinces could be allowed to actually do RMB payments. Over time, they increased to exporter with more companies allowed to do it. They increased the number of transactions, so they start to allow FDI. And we saw over time the number of this correspondent relationship really growing over time. So it was really an organic process. As I mentioned, the second channel was the participation of the Chinese banks abroad. This is just showing the foreign direct investments of financial institutions going abroad, showing their increasing presence. Also, there was an increasing number of offshore RMB clearing banks over time, mostly the Chinese state-owned banks were there. But over time, there was a lot of challenges. As the RMB use started to pick up, there was a lot of technical challenges that prevailed further expansion of the payments. And we saw problems, for instance, in terms of time zones. So the Synapse, the clearinghouse, there was not overlap with major financial centers. So if you are making RMB payments from New York to US, we do take 2-3 days at least because of the differences in time changes. There was problem with the Chinese code. So there was a lot, because of the Chinese code was not overlapping with the dollar one, there's a lot of payment rejection over time. And this caused a lot of delay to banks. However, so from this need to speed up the payment process, the PBOC created the SIPs. There was also increased expansion over time. So at the beginning was just trade, and then they expanded to financial messages. The SIPs, they have a message standards that is compatible of English and Chinese, so they mitigate the problem of translation. And they also make the SIPs convertible to the SWIFT code, which is the key message system among commercial banks. But they also make it independent, which has very important political implications. And also they expanded the time operation of the SIPs, which actually allow it to have overlap with all major financial centers and then speed up payments. This is just a figure showing how the expansion of the SIPs in terms of number of participants and volumes. Over time, we saw a pickup in recent years, especially. But this is important. I'm just wrapping up. I think the SIPs was very fast increase, but it's also important to not overweight the importance of the SIPs. Comparing with the CHIPS, the Chinese case, so I did in the left is the numbers of the SIPs, and the right, the US case. They are really like the number, it's like 10%, 20% of which So the chips is much larger than it is. And also there is a lot of regional focus of the Chinese case, the CIPS in Asia. So related to the economic relations China with in the region. So just 2 more slides to summarize that, to actually give a little bit of nuance. Of course, the argument of this paper is that the payment infrastructures play a very important role in reducing the friction and increasing the acceptability of the currency. But this is not only the fact, of course. Interest rates play a very important role. So if you see, for instance, recently the Chinese use of China RMB internationally has increased. And that is one explanation is now that is borrowing RMB is cheaper than borrowing dollars, for instance. If we consider foreign exchange, remain stable. So the basic interest rate is very important, and I think for Latin America, where especially in Brazil, interest rate is very high. So there's, it's very costly for exporters or others to actually borrowing in reais. So I think the interest rate is a key component of this. But also this is from other paper that I did with Pedro Perfeito, my co-author. We also show that, for instance, in the case of the foreign exchange markets, higher RMB use is also connected for you to having a clearing bank abroad, if that is currency direct trading between RMB and local currency, if the country has economic proximity with China. Other factors is, for instance, if that is a financial center, investment quotas. So there is a lot of very specific factors that also boost. But overall, we show that payment systems are very reduce the payment frictions. So yeah, so just concluding, I think this study shows that is given the highly dependence of payment dollar use international monetary system, central banks can play an important role to jumpstart currency internationalization process and hence de-dollarization. There are many factors that influence, but cross-border is one of them. And also we need to take into account that this is not a process that is going to happen overnight, but this is something that is an evolving network. But countries need to start from somewhere, and China started in 2009. So that's all. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marina. I totally agree. China is one of the main actors in the dollarization process. So yeah, I totally agree. Now, well, first of all, I need to say thanks to all of the speakers. But now I'm gonna give the floor to Ana Garcia. We will share her final reflections before to move on the question and answer session. So please, Ana. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge, and all colleagues and friends who are here, also the public that we have around 50 people. We'll switch what Marina did. Marina started in Portuguese and then went to English. I will now start in Portuguese as I agreed that with Latindadd. Bom, muito bom dia a todos e todas. Vou procurar ser muito breve, dada também a limitação de tempo do nosso colega Estevam. Queria agradecer a Latindadd, em nome do BRICS Policy Center, pela parceria que temos mantido desde o ano passado e ainda dizer o quão importante o segmento da nossa parceria nesse tema, particularmente monetário e econômico, no que tange aos países BRICS. E queria agradecer aqui aos colegas da mesa pelas excelentes e muito importantes apresentações. Vou traçar comentários gerais e perguntas para todos os participantes. A primeira é que é muito evidente, mas é importante reforçar, que a moeda é uma questão econômica e técnica, mas que depende do poder político. E por isso a dependência do dólar ainda é tão relevante diante da construção da hegemonia norte-americana desde o início do século XX, mas mais aceleradamente a partir do pós-guerra com as instituições econômicas que sustentam a hegemonia americana. O poder do dólar se expandiu antes da guerra, Marina coloca isso um pouco no artigo dela, mas de fato o dólar passa a ser a moeda global, primeiramente atrelado ao ouro, no pós-guerra e particularmente a partir da década de 70, no que nós aqui no Brasil chamamos do dólar flexível. E o debate que nós temos hoje sobre desdolarização, ou um termo melhor, é o crescente uso de moedas locais, que não dispensa o dólar, é isso eu acho muito importante reforçar, é um debate que se atrela à crise ou não da hegemonia norte-americana e quais alternativas surgem no sistema internacional para a reorganização do poder político vinculado ao poder econômico e, portanto, tão importante o tema da China e dos BRICS. Como é muito já debatido e conhecido o debate sobre os privilégios extravagantes do dólar, e esse privilégio extravagante se dá tanto no poder dos Estados Unidos de financiamento do seu sistema militar internacional, da expansão das suas empresas, mas hoje, mais do que tudo, na sua capacidade de endividamento público. Esse é um privilégio que apenas os americanos têm, e dada a imensa crise da dívida que nós vivemos nos países do sul global, vou usar esse termo, Marta Paredes, minha colega da Claxo, que chamou a atenção sobre o uso dos termos, né, países em desenvolvimento, vou usar aqui então periferia sul global, que entendo que é importante. Apenas os americanos têm o principal esse privilégio extravagante, é a sua capacidade de endividamento, com muitas consequências, mas sem limitações na sua própria moeda. No entanto, além de um privilégio extravagante, há também um custo, um fardo, né, um burden, né, extravagante de ser uma moeda global. E isso impõe dificuldades à China, e isso impõe dificuldades aos BRICS. Não é simples se tornar uma moeda de uso global sem alterar matrizes importantes da economia nacional de um país, ou seja, se tornar emprestador de última instância, ter um sistema financeiro absolutamente aberto a compensações internacionais, poder financiar, né, outros países de forma mais abrangente. E, neste momento, a China não demonstra ainda nem capacidade e nem vontade política de assumir esse papel. Portanto, nós estamos numa crise de hegemonia, uma transição de hegemonia, porque ainda não temos uma moeda que possa efetivamente substituir o dólar. Acho que o professor Estevam colocou isso com clareza, né? Se não o dólar, o quê? E essa é a grande questão que nós temos. Um elemento trazido em todas as apresentações foi os momentos de crise, que são momentos que efetivamente incentivam ou dão abertura para o uso de moedas locais. Na América Latina, a crise da dívida, depois a crise de 2008, o sistema CIPS, como a Marina acabou de trazer, impulsionado pela crise de 2008, ou no caso da Rússia ou da região euroasiática, como o Artem trouxe, a crise desencadeada pelas guerras e conflitos e o dólar sendo usado como um instrumento de guerra, né? Aqui, como alguns colegas economistas no Brasil chamam a bomba dólar. O dólar sendo usado como um mecanismo de sanção contra países em guerra, como é o caso da Rússia. E isso incentivou muito a Rússia na presidência do BRICS em 2024 a propor um conjunto de mecanismos para aumentar o uso de moedas locais. Então, queria que os colegas pudessem comentar esse elemento, a disparidade entre o elemento político e o elemento técnico, a vontade política de desdolarizar, impulsiona, porém, há um conjunto de limitações e dificuldades técnicas relevantes. Acho que os bancos centrais são peças-chave nisso, e por isso muito mais conservadores. Nós vivemos isso no âmbito dos BRICS, e acho que Marina fez uma excelente pesquisa com relação ao papel do Banco Central da China, mas que em momentos de crise, mesmo com as dificuldades técnicas, esses atores veem oportunidades de aumentar o uso de moedas locais. Logo, no momento mais atual que nós vivemos, a questão sobre, se não o dólar, qual moeda? Qual é o lugar das moedas digitais, entendendo que não substituem uma moeda forte, com banco central que sustente, mas qual é o lugar das moedas digitais, se isso é, na leitura de vocês, uma potencial alternativa aqui na região da América Latina ou é mesmo no âmbito dos países dos BRICS. E um tema ainda mais atual é o uso do Banco Central americano e do governo americano de desvalorização do dólar para buscar tentar compensar o efeito das tarifas. Isso vem sendo discutido, o dólar vem se se desvalorizando desde janeiro desse ano, de forma muito acelerada, e muito se debate sobre como isso pode tentar atenuar efeitos possíveis da vulnerabilidade das tarifas. Queria escutar vocês sobre isso. E, por fim, só para fechar, a capacidade ou não do conjunto de países dos BRICS de avançar o uso de moedas locais ou até mesmo o renminbi chinês, o yuan chinês, olhando para, de um lado, dois mecanismos, o CRA, né, que é o arranjo contingencial de reservas, e o novo Banco de Desenvolvimento. Um significa emprestar, fazer lendings, né, fazer empréstimos a projetos em países em moedas locais, hoje em torno de 26%, e o outro é um mecanismo de compensação e empréstimos, como o FMI, que seria o CRA, e isso está em mãos dos bancos centrais dos BRICS, e por isso mesmo ainda em testes, dado o aspecto mais conservador, a natureza mais conservadora, menos exposta a riscos que têm os bancos centrais. Então, queria saber um pouco a opinião dos colegas da mesa sobre o quão esses mecanismos poderiam avançar no âmbito dos BRICS. Aí, com isso, eu encerro. Obrigada, Jorge. Prazer estar com vocês.
Muito obrigado, Ana. I'll follow and support Ana García. I'm going to speak now in Spanish. Entonces, creo que podemos darle respuesta a Ana en sus preguntas por orden, respetando que Esteban se va en unos minutos, desgraciadamente, entonces podemos empezar con él y después seguimos el orden de las presentaciones para finalmente terminar con las preguntas que tenemos en el box de preguntas, son unas cuantas. Entonces, Esteban, podemos empezar contigo. Gracias.
Ok, voy a las preguntas las preguntas por el chat, porque vi que había un par para mí, o las preguntas de
Sí.
Ana.
Como gustes. Si
Bien.
gustas.
Okay, regarding the issue of political will, I think that's central to create an alternative to the US dollar. And what I've seen in Latin America, from my experience, is effectively, in some cases, a lack of political will. And the idea to create sort of an alternative to the dollar, or the dollar coexisting with other types of arrangements in local currencies, requires some type of integration agreement. Now, the problem what I've seen with integration agreements sometimes is, besides obviously the lack of political will, is the lack of realism of those regional agreements. And I'm gonna illustrate with a precise case, which is a Caribbean single market and economy that was created in the 2000s, was supposed to come to flourish in the late 2000s. It was meant to be sort of a replica of the European Union, but applied to the Caribbean. And the way it was structured like a textbook transition to a monetary union, where you would have sort of customs union, then you have capital integration and a currency union. And when you talk to the banks at that time, the financial sector, they said the financial sector is integrated, and it becomes integrated before the real sector or customs unions exist. And that's what I mean by realism and political will. That would be my answer to Anna. But I have not seen political will as yet for an alternative currency. Regarding, I had a couple of questions. One regarding the I think that was regarding the lending in the local bond market. Well, if the presence of foreign investors in local bond markets represent a large share or investors in the local markets, and the foreign investors have the currency in which they repatriate, which is the dollar, you may have a capital outflow. If given considerations of whether you're hedged or not and so on. The capital outflow has an effect on the nominal exchange rate. The nominal exchange rate has an effect on sovereign risk. Sovereign risk has an effect on the risk of the non-financial corporate sector. In addition, since most firms in the developing world, operate under currency mismatch, you would have a negative balance of payments effect. This may constrain through different channels investment. So you may have all of those channels by trying to develop the local market, trying to think that by developing the local market, you're going to avoid those channels. If you add, for example, and with this I finish, during the pandemic where everyone was so happy because they offered low interest rates and large maturity rates, they forgot to take into account the maturity risk. And when there are devaluations with a high maturity risk, the impact on the exchange rate and on the local conditions, the economy may be quite significant. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Esteban. Ahora podemos pasar con Marcelo. Igual, primero dar respuesta a la pregunta de Ana, y tenemos igual un par de preguntas en el chat. Te puedo ayudar a localizarlas, si no, igual te las comento. Entonces, la primera es: ¿cómo impactan las asimetrías económicas entre países en el fracaso o desbalance de estos acuerdos, de los acuerdos regionales de pago? Y la segunda es: ¿cómo se trata un acuerdo regional de pago en moneda local de un país que está permanentemente en devaluación? Entonces, te cedo la palabra, Marcelo. Creo que Marcelo se congeló. Podemos, mientras, en lo que se vuelve a conectar, avanzar con... we can, in the midway that Marcelo is once again online, probably we can start with Marina, because unfortunately Artem gone, so we can start with Marina.
Sounds good. Ok. Tá, talvez eu comece... eu tenho 3 pontos principais. Oh, should I go on, or Marcelo?
No, move on. Yeah.
Ok. Eu tenho 3 pontos principais. Eu acho que a Ana tocou em aspectos muito importantes. Então, assim, a primeira questão é: como a gente sai do... Primeiro, que a gente tem que ter um political willness, né? De tentar diminuir a exposição ao dólar. A partir daí, quais são as soluções técnicas? Eu acho que tem um salto que nem sempre é óbvio, e muitas vezes passa para a gente pensar em questões microeconômicas. Então, no final das contas, no final do dia, a gente pode querer muito reduzir a exposição ao dólar. Mas quem vai decidir usar o dólar ou não são companhias, são bancos. Quais são as reduções de custos de transações que a gente pode pensar que vai estimular eles a usar moeda local? Então, coisas que eu ouvi muito durante entrevistas na China durante meu doutorado era empresas ou bancos que falavam assim: antes eu usava o dólar e eu gastava muito fazendo operação de hedge, e para mim era muito custo. A partir do momento que eu tenho a opção de usar em RMB, eu não preciso mais ter esse custo de transação, por isso que eu comecei a adotar. Então, assim, são soluções, são no final decisões micro, que eu acho que do ponto de vista de Banco Central, de Ministro das Finanças, a gente tem que pensar quais são os estímulos micros que vão decidir e ter impactos macros. Então, assim, isso eu acho que é um aspecto chave. Isso foi questões, por exemplo, no caso do acordo regional no Mercosul, do Brasil e Argentina. No final das contas, as empresas que exportaram decidiam usar a moeda local por causa de reduções de custo de transação. Então, esse é o primeiro ponto. O segundo ponto, a gente também tem que pensar em soluções coletivas. Então, assim, eu acho que o caso do RMB é um caso de sucesso, um caso de sucesso chinês de reduzir as vulnerabilidades ao dólar. Mas para casos como o Brasil ou outros países em desenvolvimento, qual é a vantagem de simplesmente substituir dólar por uma outra moeda externa, o RMB ou o euro. Então, quais são as soluções coletivas que, por exemplo, a gente pode pensar dentro dos BRICS ou regionalmente para ter realmente transações de moedas locais que tenham o net, porque aí realmente você tem um ganho dos dois lados. Claro que tem questões muito mais complexas, porque aí tem questão qual que é o câmbio, mudanças de câmbio vão influenciar isso. Então, qual é o processo de crédito que você tem que ter dentro dos bancos centrais para tornar isso possível? Então, tem questões micros, mas qual é uma solução coletiva que a gente pode ter? O meu último ponto, eu acho que é um ponto muito importante que a Ana mencionou, da questão das moedas digitais. Eu sou muito crítica no papel dessas moedas digitais e na realidade, especialmente se elas forem privadas, se elas podem conseguir ajudar os países em desenvolvimento. Claro, a gente tem casos de moedas privadas, Cuba, Argentina, que elas são usadas por cidadãos para fazer transferências importantes que elas não conseguiriam fazer de outra forma. Mas se a gente pensar em economias maiores, por exemplo, o caso do Brasil, eu estou agora escrevendo um paper que deve ser publicado como working paper no próximo mês, sobre a exposição que o Brasil está tendo na balança de pagamentos por essa importância das fintechs, dos cryptocurrencies. Então, no caso do Brasil ano passado, o mesmo valor que a gente teve um superávit na balança comercial, que a gente teve um superávit de comércio, a gente gastou comprando cryptocurrency. Então, assim, qual é o problema na balança de pagamentos de você ter toda essa exposição? Então, na realidade, essas novas tecnologias podem levar a um novo processo de dolarização se a gente não tomar cuidado, em vez de criar mais espaço de política econômica. Então, eu vou parar por aqui. Obrigada.
Muito obrigado, Marina. Entonces, ahora podemos terminar con Marcelo, ya está de vuelta. Entonces, igual para dar respuesta a Ana y a las que tenemos ahí en el chat, te cedo la palabra, Marcelo. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias, disculpen que tuve un problema con la conexión a internet. La verdad es que el planteo que hizo Ana me pareció sumamente interesante, si era un problema técnico, un tema político, y creo que quedó claro por lo que dijo la mayor parte de los expositores y Ana misma, que es principalmente un problema político. El tema técnico creo que es relativamente sencillo, creo incluso ahora con las monedas digitales, sobre todo aquellas emitidas por los bancos centrales, pueden incluso llegar a facilitar cualquier problema técnico, no hay una dificultad en sí misma. La mayor dificultad técnica creo que reside en los desbalances comerciales, de que si hay dentro de una región países que tienen superávit crónicos y otros países que tienen déficits crónicos, esa situación de alguna forma tiene que estar resuelta y ahí sí veo un problema porque estamos hablando de un problema productivo, estamos hablando de un problema que tiene que ver con la estructura productiva de cada país y no solamente con una cuestión de pago. Entonces, en primer término, me parece que es el motivo por el cual los acuerdos de pago siempre tuvieron inconvenientes, problemas, es principalmente político, falta de entusiasmo político, más allá muchas veces de discursos, no, en los hechos no se hizo nada en concreto, no se hizo muchos avances en concreto. Por otro lado, también me pareció súper interesante algo que marcó Ana, que tiene que ver con cómo en los contextos de crisis las monedas locales o las monedas regionales prosperan. Y en ese punto me pareció súper interesante porque tenemos a la década del 30 por un lado, a la década del 80 en América Latina y ahora más recientemente con todo lo que está sucediendo. Y quería llamar la atención que también puede haber desafíos ahí, porque también pueden armarse bloques monetarios, bloques comerciales que pueden llegar a generar desafíos para los países para poder defender sus monedas, en la medida que quizás los países más grandes van a estar interesados en sostener un área monetaria, como por ejemplo pasó con Inglaterra en la década del 30, que armó su área libra para tratar de sostener su poder, al menos en un fragmento, en un segmento del mundo, y ya no en todo el mundo. Entonces, también representa riesgo para los países de América Latina eh, la desaparición de una hegemonía. Y por otro lado, también como último comentario, me parece interesante marcar que en la teoría monetaria heterodoxa es siempre una de las cosas primeras que aprendemos y que consiste en los autores keynesianos, capitalistas, que el dinero es crédito, y cuando pensamos que el dinero es crédito, se aplica también, fundamentalmente se aplican los acuerdos regionales de pago, porque en la medida de que se emite dinero homogéneamente para hacer pagos internacionales, al mismo tiempo se está otorgando un crédito, naturalmente no es que sea una cuestión pactada de antemano, sino que endógenamente se está creando créditos, se están creando depósitos, y por lo tanto eso hace que el sistema económico funcione, y esto también lo tenemos que pensar en términos regionales, y eso me parecía interesante de no separar estas dos cuestiones. Creo que había alguna pregunta en relación a los problemas de la simetría entre Brasil y Argentina, o entre Ecuador y Venezuela en cuanto a términos monetarios. Si una moneda que muy débil, que tiene problemas de devaluaciones permanentes, puede llegar a incorporarse en un acuerdo de pagos, y en ese punto yo creo que los acuerdos de pagos no solucionan los problemas domésticos necesariamente. Pueden ayudar, pero si hay una moneda que está todos los meses devolviéndose en términos nominales, es muy difícil que los exportadores la quieran. Entonces, ahí sí se presenta, creo que un problema. Entonces, me parece de vuelta que los acuerdos de pago no son simplemente un instrumento, sino que son una política dentro de muchas otras políticas que tienen que ver con la integración regional también en términos comerciales, y tienen que ver también con el desarrollo económico. Por lo tanto, creo que espero haber respondido a sus preguntas y comentarios.
Muchas gracias, Marcelo, Marina, Ana. Finalmente, nos quedan 5 minutos. Tenemos una pregunta más en el box de preguntas. Creo que Marina puede darle muy buena respuesta. Es una pregunta de Bhumika. No sé si. I don't know if you can see the question, Marina, in the question and answer box.
Oh, in the Q&A.
Otherwise,
Okay.
yeah.
For balance.
Can you please expand the role of the diversifying forex or reserves, especially through gold accumulation right now, led by China, and whether there is this more critical leverage break dollar dependency relative to trade and goods payments? More specifically, given the central role of reserve accumulation to the inequality bias, whereby the South finance are not in the net flows, while the South sacrifice ability to productively use its forex earnings, how to address reserves.
Maybe I could jump on. This is a very good point. I think that I think the run to the gold is especially geopolitical uncertainties, especially after the conflict in Europe and how the dollar was weaponized. There is a lot of demand. We saw one of the reasons gold price is record high is this, right? In terms of uncertainty, the gold is the safe asset, especially when there are questions about the role of the dollar. We know that in cases of the RMB, the use for reserves is relatively low, just 2%. I think we are going to have, distributional problem if the foreign currency, if the reserves is in any foreign currency. Something that we have put forward is to think about, multi-currency reserve. So this is something that show up, for instance, in the Stiglitz report, and I think 2010 he did this work to the UN, where he highlighted, the possibility of having a multi-currency reserve. Recently, we published a paper called Sustainable Future Bonds. So we suggested that actually reserves could be the liabilities of multilateral development banks. So actually would be like a shared currency ones. I think like there are feasible solutions to do something that is more shared. But but I completely agree. There are very high costs of keeping high levels of reserves, and by doing this, you are allowing the U.S. to continuing, financing the disequilibrium in the fiscal disequilibrium, basically. Yeah. I hope this answers.
Thank you so much, Marina. Bueno, pues con esto, muchas gracias a todos los panelistas, muchas gracias, Ana. Con esto damos por terminado el webinar. Esteban, muchas gracias, te quedaste hasta el final. Pues Nada más los invitamos a leer el documento recién publicado por Marcelo, está colgado en la red, ya se compartió también por el chat, tanto en español como en inglés, y seguimos en contacto para futuros temas. Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Muchas gracias, un placer. Adiós.
Muchas
Hasta luego,
gracias.
placer.
Chao.
Gracias. Chao, chao.
Obrigada.
Obrigada.
Obrigado.
Obrigada. And I'm reading your work now, Marcelo.